day. Welcome to this edition of City View. Some of you that may tune into government a little more closely would be well aware that this is budget season. You may have seen the administration present to the City Council the annual fiscal appropriation, and that was done just a couple of weeks back. I'd like to share with you tonight some of the detail that we share with the Council, and perhaps talk a little bit more about some of the different categories that we're talking about with the budget. Under state law, I need to file a budget with the City Council 45 days before the end of the present fiscal year. So we usually go in around the first Monday of May, which actually gives more time than is required under the law. So with that, I'd like to start it off, and we're going to get into the budget, some of the aspects of the budget, and talk a little bit about some of the capital programs that we're talking about as well. And just so basic understanding, in our form of government, the mayor submits the budget to the council. It emanates from the mayor's office. The council can approve or cut the budget. They cannot add to the budget. Once the council approves the school part of the budget, then the school committee then comes together, and I am by ex officio chair of the school committee, but then I am one voting member out of the 7 members of the school committee to decide on that school budget. The council can go in and cut aspects of different budgets, but not the education budget. They can only deal with the bottom line. That's the role under the law of the school committee. So having said that, why don't we get started? The first slide talks a little bit beyond the 19 budget proposal. We'll get into really the continued stability, and on that slide we see $310,814,649. That is the proposed fiscal 19 budget before the City Council as we speak. And as we're doing this show, there's already been a couple of meetings before the City Council with some of our department heads. So essentially each department will appear before the City Council, explain their budget, take questions on their budget, speak about the mission of their department to the City Council. And of course, when you have some new City Councilors, sometimes there's more questions. The budget really doesn't change a whole lot from year to year. If we look at the percentages in the breakout, it's mostly personal service, it's mostly personnel that's included in the budget. So it's an increase of about 3.81%, which is reasonable in these times. The public safety, education, employee benefits account for almost 80% of the entire budget. We see a $3.2 million increase for Quincy Public Schools, and the 90% of increase is really contractual and non-elective expenses. What do we mean by that? So that's all the salaries that are under contract. For example, all union employees are getting a 2% raise as of July 1st, as we negotiated in the contract. And then we also get a bill from the retirement board towards the city's portion towards the retirement, and that goes up each year. We also have other expenses that automatically go up. With some cases it's electricity, some cases it's rubbish, either disposal or collection, and in some cases healthcare. Although this year is a little different, we'll get into that. So this shows under the pie chart a little bit of a breakup of how it's broken out. Education being the biggest piece of the pie, although that's not complete. We'll talk a little bit about that later. Infrastructure management, which really is public works, parks, forestry, cemetery, parking and traffic, human services, cultural recreation, debt service, employee benefits, administration, finance, public safety, of course, is police and fire departments. It gives you kind of an idea how the pie is broken up for the budget. The priorities for 2019, as I mentioned, the schools is a pretty heavy one. $3.2 million increase plus whatever breakage is in the department. What do I mean by that? The schools have more than 800 teachers. Every year we have retirements, and a new teacher comes in a first step 1, whereas a retiring teacher is a much higher level step. So when you're retirees, you have breakage. You have additional monies to work with, and my tradition has been to leave it in the budget and let the superintendent and his team and the school committee decide on that. So it's really a closer to $4 million number that we're working with for increase in the school side. Now, we've got challenges over there. We can talk again about that. But we have an increased investment in public safety, both in the budget. We have a full amount of money in there for police training, for example. And I know people run into me from time to time, and sometimes we see events around the country that really are not applicable to Quincy. However, the point's well taken. Is our department well trained? How professional are we? And can I tell you that we're very professional. These These people have been well educated, well trained, but there's the ongoing training portion of it for various incidents, and I think that's as extremely important as anything we do in those departments. So we have the full funding for regular training in the police department. We have an increase in the court time line, and we have an increase in the overtime line, in addition to whatever contractual raises that were there. Very similar on the fire side. Last year we made a major investment adding a lot more manpower in the fire service, which keeps Rescue 1 in service all the time now, and gives us better staffing, better manpower on a regular basis. So both those departments I'm very comfortable with the levels of service there. And then we have some increases in funding for health department and special services. That's to address some of the issues we have in the community. For example, we've had a lot more restaurants in our Quincy community of the city the last several years. And under the law and under the code, there's certain requirements by those restaurants to be in standard. And part of that process is the health department, our health inspectors go out and inspect these locations to make sure they're up to standards. And I had an outside study take a look at this, and they tell me we really should have additional folks in there doing some inspections. In addition, we've increased substantially the amount of money we're dedicating to rodent control. The last couple of years we have seen an uptick. Actually, it goes back probably 3 or 4 years, but we've mitigated that with additional rodent control. We have 2 outside companies, exterminating companies, that are working around the city for us on a regular basis. So that will be in there as well. So let me get back to the schools a little bit, and you can see in this category the raw number for the budget that we show in the budget. For example, the $104 million for this year's school budget. The city's commitment to the schools is far greater than that. The reality is per student spending is much higher. Every community does it differently, but just to give you an example, this is the straight budget for the education department, which means salaries and direct expenses. However, all the health insurance costs are in the health insurance line in our city, for example. Some communities carry that in the education budget as it relates to their budget. Our park department does all the grounds. That cost is in the park department. Our public works is involved in paving the schoolyards and doing masonry improvements. That's in their budget. Our police department, provides resource officers in our schools, DARE offices, all the crossing guards that cross our kids on the intersections. They're in the police budget. In public buildings, which does all the maintenance and improvements to buildings across the city, is in the public buildings budget. So all of those outside sources add to what we eventually spend on the school budget. So it's more than $40 million more than what you see in the regular budget, and I think that's healthy. We're far above the required foundation spending for each child, so that's not an issue for Quincy. Some communities struggle to meet the foundation spending. We're well above that. I'm very proud of our school system. I think we're second to none. We have outstanding teacher-student ratios for class size. Superintendent and his team are on top of all the curriculum issues and ed eval and all the requirements and certifications by every level of government, which makes it more and more difficult today with the paperwork and certifications than ever before. At the end of the day, it's about what happens in the classroom between the teacher and the child. But it's not that simple, because you have a whole group of people that come around to support that experience. So whether it's maintaining the building, or whether it's the nurses, the guidance counselors, the custodians, the cafeteria workers, as I mentioned, the crossing guy, getting people there, obviously the principal, the leadership in the buildings, it's the coaches, it's all of those folks that work very hard on behalf of every student. But at the end of the day, it truly is what happens in the classroom. So we're grateful for our dedicated staff, and particularly our teachers. So this budget is a healthy one. And look, I understand that we can always improve, and we're never going to satisfy everybody. There's some folks that would love to have foreign languages starting in the first grade. There are folks that may want to have more music and more art and what have you, and all of those are legitimate. But I tell you, we're delivering as a school system for all the needs of our kids and our families. And again, I'm very, very proud of that. This is another graph that shows the actual school spending. That top line far exceeds the foundation budget, which is the graph, that's the blue and white graph going across So it's pretty significant above what the norm would be. Again, this is some more information about foundation enrollment. We've got about 9,300 kids in our system. That's been pretty consistent in recent years. If you go back 10 years, it was about 8,800. So we're up some, but not dramatically. We have, as I said, we have very good class sizes at all our levels, and that's very, very important in all we do. So per student spending increases by 7.25% since the last fiscal year, and I think this is an interesting one. The public schools on average spend around 8% per student more than the state median. So education is the largest single increase in the budget and more than double the total elective spending. So let me conclude the education story by saying, outside of public safety, there's nothing more important we do in government than to educate our kids, the future citizens of this community and our country. And we're going to continue to work very hard at that going forward. The other thing I would say is, those folks that don't have kids in the schools, your school system has a direct relationship to the values of our real estate in the community. If there's a poor school system, people don't want to move here. It has a direct effect on your values. So whether you have kids in the school or not, it's important we have a healthy education budget to protect the values of the entire community. So with that, we'll move on to our next slide. And I mentioned a couple of these things, includes the positions that we're adding. I mentioned the food inspector. I don't know if I mentioned the plan examiner, but we have a plan examiner in our inspectional services department. So every construction project comes in, gets a review by the plan examiner. So we're adding another plan examiner. I mentioned the part-time wire and plumbing inspectors to help us deal with the challenges with the economic development. But again, I reiterate that the permit fees are up dramatically. So the cost of these really get incurred by those permit fees, not by your taxes. We're also including some money in the SWAP program, which is seniors that take advantage by working so many hours. They get so much taken off on the real estate taxes. And the CDBG, which is Community Development Block Grant, it's federal money. That helps offset some of the things we deliver for services. One of the new things we've added this year is the GIS administrator. All our departments in this day and age want to tap into the greatest and latest technology, and the GIS is pretty remarkable what can be done by using GIS mapping. And that goes for Assessor Department, Public Works, Parks, really anybody and everybody that would need for identifying things in our city. For example, we used to have to go out and measure every linear foot when we're doing a road over. By using the GIS technology, you can actually take all that information off the computer without having to physically going out to those sites. So it's pretty neat. So I mentioned the training in the police department, fire department funding. Again, both departments do an excellent job. We have, a real good response time rate in this city, particularly compared to a lot of communities. As folks may know, we have 8 firehouses, and between the sectors that the police cruisers cover, the cars cover. There's 13 different sectors on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday nights that are covered. We have good coverage, so when somebody calls 911, they get service very quickly in the city, and that continues to be a priority. And I would suggest that working with Brewster Ambulance has been phenomenal. They've also been an important piece of what we do public safety-wise. First-class outfit, well-trained EMTs and paramedics. So one item that I've spoke about a little bit in length, and I'll talk a little bit now, and that is the creation of a separate Director of Emergency Management. It's been under the auspices of the fire department the last few years, and I appreciate their dedication to it. But they have other duties, and they're very good at what they do in responding. This position is needed to really be year-round planning for all the possibilities. We've had a number of major storm events during my tenure as mayor. Whether you go back to 2010, the floods we had in West Quincy with 10 inches of rain in a couple of days, which caused extensive flooding over in the Ulrich Road, Bigelow Street, Miller Street, Cross Street, all those areas, as well as other spots around the city. People were out of their homes for long periods of time. You could go back to the winter from hell a few years back, where we experienced the worst snowfalls in a 5-week period in the history of keeping records. We can go back to just a few months ago with the major flooding issues caused by incredible tide surges. 2 different storms, same issue, and that was interesting. In January, we had the bay frozen over, so we had this incredible increase in tide levels, but it didn't do the surge over the walls. It really kind of creeped around the marshes We had extensive damage to places like Broad Middle School and the Kennedy Center. And then, of course, in March, we had the major storm event where the surge just overtook the seawalls and cut off both peninsulas for a period of time. My point is this: we have to plan for those events more now than ever before. The old days, it was civil defense and worried about fallout shelters and maybe the bomb was going to be dropped. This is all about the climate, essentially. We've experienced enough to know what we need to do, and we need a dedicated person to do the planning ahead of time with Red Cross, Salvation Army, all our schools, set up shelters ahead of time, have them stocked ahead of time, and be able to pivot based on the storm need. And then, of course, you're working with all of the private schools, the kindergarten places, the nursing homes, medical facilities. They all have to be part of a major plan that is accepted by MEMA and FEMA and that we work with every day. And we need somebody to do that on a regular basis. So that is the main reason why I'm calling for the creation of a Director of Emergency Management. It has become a specific talent in career today. It's truly a profession today. The old days, it wasn't really somebody dedicated to all those things. So we'll be looking to do that once the council, of course, assuming the council agrees with my priority there. We're also adding 2 parking control officers. Those are the folks that are out there enforcing the parking ordinances of our city. And we're going to be adding one to the South Quincy area, and they truly pay for themselves, folks. I know I hear from folks all the time about people illegally parking, and that's the role of these individuals. And then finally, addressing some of the needs, we've established a separate Office of Substance Abuse Prevention. Now, Laura Martin, who's the coordinator, has been on for a period of time now, but we've established it such in the budget that she has money to work with. And this is very important for our city. As we know, we've undergone some major challenges, as the entire Commonwealth has, relating to the substance abuse crisis. And that money is derived from revenues out of the medical marijuana dispensary up in West Quincy. So again, that does not come out of your tax dollars. That was the host agreement we came together with them on just a few years ago. So it's paying for itself, if you will. Then we see trends, things that we're working at. We deal with what we call the bond agencies, our outside consultants and advisors on finances. But anytime we go to borrow money as a city, we have what's called a bond call. And the ratings agencies look at everything we're doing. Are we sticking and adhering to our policies and procedures? What are our fund balances? What are our liabilities? And they make a determination on a rating each time we go to borrow. Now, we have a strong, very strong rating. I'm pleased to say that has been raised since I've been in office. There's only 3 or 4 communities that have a higher rating in Massachusetts than Quincy, and I do believe we're going to get there. We'll be one of those communities not too far in the future. So what are the challenges when it comes to that? Obviously, you have to have a good, strong fund balance. We have to meet our expenses with revenues. So that's one. 2 is, what do we receive beyond the budget? I mean, do we have strong revenues beyond? So they look at that. Are you running in a deficit, or are you running in a surplus, essentially? And then they look at the fund balance as far as what we're putting away for in stabilization, like what folks would be doing. Some people call it a rainy day fund. I mean, you put money away. Someday, if the boiler went, you want to have money in there to do the boiler. If something catastrophic happened, if you lost your job, you want to have some money aside to carry your ongoing costs in a case such as that. So those are the kinds of things we look at. We're in a strong position, but we're increasing our fund balances, our stabilization fund, our OPEB, and our snow and ice removal fund has gone up each year. So we get to a point where we're actually covering the actual cost of an average winter. That was one that we used to deficit spend. All cities and towns did that for years. It's a structural deficit. It made no sense to me. So we've addressed that. So our total debt, and that means the stuff we're borrowing for our new schools, seawalls, drainage projects, certain types of equipment like a ladder truck, those things we borrow for. It's a very healthy 6.2% of the total budget. But when you knock down things that are paid for other areas, for example, the downtown, the new taxes out of the downtown pays for the borrowing that we do in the downtown, so it's not coming off of your tax bill. It's really a 5.3% of the budget when you add off or take off those other items. For example, hotel tax. We pay down the park bonds with hotel tax money paid for by visitors, not by the taxpayers. So my point is the budget is strong. It is healthy. I look forward to the debate and dialogue with our with our city councils as we do this. But as the outside agencies have said, in strong budgetary performance, strong budgetary flexibility, and low overall net debt. There's a lot of communities that have 10, 12% debt ratios. We're not near that. I don't expect to get that high. We have gone to the city council with our recommended numbers in our policies and procedures. They've accepted those and voted those. So we'll continue to work with our folks. I mean, for example, the Sterling Middle School, which is the new middle school, is under construction. We have to fund that. So we take short-term borrowing, and then once the project's done, we borrow long-term for it, and that goes against our debt category in the budget. But we plan for these things. And by the way, we're getting some 63 cents on the dollar back for Sterling from the state through the School Building Authority. It's important for me to remind you that as well. We leverage our tax dollars with an awful lot of state and federal tax dollars. And that's part of my role as the Chief Executive Officer of the city to do that. And we have great relationships at every level of government, and I'm proud of that. Our legislative delegation does an incredible job. You know, Senator Keenan, the Speaker, I wish he was a Speaker, but the House Majority Leader Mariano, Representative Chan, Representative Ayers, Representative Hunt, they've all been very cooperative in helping us build our Chapter 70 monies as well as other grant opportunities. They're there for us. You know, the governor and the lieutenant governor have been just tremendous. You look at the amount of millions of dollars of state monies that have been infused into our city over the last decade. It's pretty remarkable. It's in the hundreds of millions of dollars, folks. Congressman Lynch and our U.S. Senators Warren and Markey, they've been very cooperative in our needs and bringing federal money. The last one was the money for pump station West Quincy, more than $5 million that Congressman Lynch announced. So we're always at the table because we need their help because our infrastructure is very old. I know that you know, we talk to people all the time about that issue. It's important we maintain it. This next slide under the revenue, just an interesting slide, if you will. It shows you there's essentially three ways we raise money. The biggest is the property tax. So whether it's your residential tax or whether it's industrial commercial tax, that's part of that 75% number. And that is how our state is set up. All cities and towns are expected to go up every year on the taxes. That's how we fund government. That's how it's done. I'd like not to have to go up on the taxes, but I think we've been managing that much better the last several years, and we've gone up incrementally instead of these big spikes that people can't plan for. Our state aid is about 14%. It's not what it used to be, percentage-wise, part of the reason for that is Mass Health and some of the challenges at the state level they're having with their budget. They cannot be quite as generous as they used to be on the state aid, and I understand that. And local receipts is about 11%. What does local receipts mean? Well, if you go in for a marriage certificate, you go in for a building permit, you pay fees for these things. Those fees drop into this bucket. Your auto excise tax, for example, would fall into the local receipt bucket of the 11%. So that makes up the total revenue. This next piece is a little tricky for people sometimes to grasp, and it sounds a little flip when I say it, and I don't mean it that way at all. But we don't tax at the max. In other words, we could be taxing several $100s more per house under Prop 2.5. Essentially, over the number of years, we've left money on the table. Now, our outside agencies and advisors don't like that. They would like me to tax to the max and build our reserves that much larger. The tradition here has been fund what we need to fund and try to be sensitive to folks out there that are paying the taxes and struggling in their own homes. So the good part of this, it's called excess levy capacity. It's another $22 million we are leaving on the table. We could be taxing without a Prop 2.5 override, but we don't do that because we are sensitive to that. There's only 3 other communities in Massachusetts that have more excess levy capacity than Quincy out of 351 cities and towns. I think that's also pretty remarkable. So all of the projects we've been doing, whether we're on our 3rd new school, seawalls, flood control projects, pump stations, track, park improvements, many communities for one of those things would be doing a Prop 2.5 override. In fact, there are communities that do Prop 2.5 overrides just to operate government. Now, we don't have to do that because we have a healthy economy here, and people say, where does that money go with this new construction? This is exactly where it's going. It adds to the till, which allows us to invest back into the community. And I would also suggest it's an insurance policy. If we ever had a major, major disaster that we had to deal with some major, major millions of dollars worth of infrastructure work, for example, we could go to that excess capacity, tap it, and deal with those issues. So if you look at that slide there, you can see versus the communities around us. Boston, Braintree, Weymouth, I mean, they have very, very little on the edge there. The state average is about $1.7 million, and we're at $22 million for excess levy capacity. So it's one that folks I know don't fully understand, but we could be taxing more. We don't, because we try to strike that balance. We have a capital improvement plan that's also before the city council, but we're doing a capital improvement under 3 different areas. So our fire department, some folks may not realize this, but our firemen in Quincy, they experience a higher rate of cancer because of what they deal with each and every day, with whether it's through the skin, whether it's breathing, etc. There's been a lot of things done in the fire service to mitigate that and try to get that number down. We're spending more time on that as a community with the local 792, with Chief Barron, Deputy Chief Jackson, and the entire staff. So we've come up with some ways to do that. And a second set of turnout gear, those big coats and boots and gear that the firemen wear, we're get a second set for everybody on the job, so that when they have an incident, they immediately get out of those get washed, they get into the other one. New industrial washers and dryers in each of the firehouses so they can wash that gear. So that's important, it really is. We're also looking for new equipment, a new ladder truck, which we're looking for a tiller, which is far more maneuverable around the city. Totally equipped, it's about $1.5 million. Yes, $1.5 million. It's significant, but the life of those is about 20 years. Kincaid Park, some folks may have been following this. Kincaid is located on Water Street, between Water and Robert Street. It's literally smack between Lincoln Hancock and the Sterling Middle School. It's a tied facility, and we're going to be doing major upgrades for that neighborhood and for those school communities, including new soccer field, basketball courts, playground area, walking paths, a straightaway track for the kids from the school. So a really great program, part of what we're doing citywide in all of our parks. And then we have a complete 5-year road program that we've got before the City Council, which will be using tax money, Chapter 90 money, CDBG money. We've done a comprehensive pavement condition index, and we got a state grant to help us put that together. And that's about a $17 million cost over the next 5 years. But this is really an aggressive program to get our roads in better shape. I don't care what city or town you go to around, everyone has the same challenge. But this is a comprehensive plan to deal with that. So lastly, I want to say a thank you to my colleagues in the school committee, and look forward to their work as we continue to provide the best for our kids. And the City Council. I mean, the City Council, Brad Kroll is the president, Ian Kane is the finance chair. Each of the councils individually, thank you for your effort, your work, on behalf of the constituents, the residents. We all work with the same folks. And I appreciate your upcoming, I'll say it ahead of time, thank you in advance for all the work you'll be doing, looking over these proposals before you. And I look for your help and cooperation in getting this thing done. At the end of the day, we all work for the residents of this great city, and we're all looking for the same objective, in my opinion, the best city to live in, to work in, and to play in, if you will. We have an outstanding community. Thank you all the boards and commission members, department heads, city employees, all across the board work very, very hard each and every day. I want to thank them as well. So stay tuned. There'll be more to follow. So you certainly can tune into the Finance Committee meetings, and we'll give you updates along the way. And anytime, as you know, on any issue, question on budget or anything, feel free to reach out to my office directly. With that, thank you for tuning in to City View.